Howdy folks, welcome back to my World of Tanks replays with the mighty Jingles. As you can see today we're in the garage with another one of the big boys, the Russian Tier 10 heavy tank, the IS-4. Obviously one of the two Tier 10 heavies that the Russians have. In patch 7.3 the Russian heavies were split into two lines, some extra tanks were added. The IS-4 was bumped up to Tier 10 from Tier 9 where it sat under the IS-7. IS-7 stayed as the Tier 10 heavy tank in the faster but more lightly armoured Russian heavy tank line, and the IS-4 took its place as the new Tier 10 in the slower but more heavily armoured Russian heavy tank line. And while that's certainly true when you're grinding up towards the Tier 10s, these guys have heavier armour and aren't as fast, and these guys are quicker but their armour isn't as good. That's certainly the case when you're grinding your way up, but when you get to Tier 10 all bets are off, because the IS-4 and the IS-7 are broadly similar. I mean, it's true that the IS-4 is slower than the IS-7, but it can still do 43 kilometers per hour. It is by no means a slow heavy tank. And it's true that the IS-7 is faster, but if you just look at the raw numbers, it has 10mm thicker frontal hull armour than the IS-4 does, and this is supposed to be the more heavily armoured tank. Well, looking at the raw numbers can be deceptive, and we'll see why when we come onto the actual armour of the tank itself. But let's just get stuck into the stats, and we'll talk about that later. So, 2,500 hit points. It has obviously it doesn't have the same amount of health as the mouse. That thing's just in a class of its own with 3,000 health. But you're going to find that the IS-4 is joint second with the E100 in having the most health of the Tier 10 tanks. Joint second place, not bad. 2,500 health. It can take a good amount of hits. It's not that heavy a heavy tank. If you look at my E100, where are we? Here we go. My E100 clocks in at 130 tons. The IS-4, still a Tier 10 heavy tank, and the heavier of the two Russian heavy tanks, but mine only weighs 61.53 tons. It's half the weight of an E100. But it has a 750 horsepower engine compared to the E100's 1200 horsepower engine. But the power to weight ratio is significantly better, and it can do 43 kilometers per hour. That's bloody fast for a heavy tank, especially a Tier 10. The hull traverse speed is okay. It's a heavy tank, don't forget. 26 degrees, it's definitely not as mobile as certain other heavy tanks. And that does kind of fit with the whole idea of this Russian heavy tank line being not as mobile as the other Russian heavy tank line that leads to the IS-7. So, it's to be expected. It doesn't turn especially well. And again, the turret also turns pretty slowly. 22 degrees per second is not very quick at all. It's better than the Germans, but it's pretty slow for the Russians. You get on the view range and signal range, what you'd expect. These are Tier 10 machines after all. 400 metre view range, 720 metre signal range. But it's a heavy tank, it's all about the gun, and it's all about the armour. Now, the armour on the IS-10 is a funny topic. The raw numbers say that at the front it has 140mm of hull armour, it has 160 at the sides, and it has 100 at the rear. So technically thicker armour on the side. Okay, well we'll cover that in more detail in a minute. Turret armour, 200mm at the front, 250mm at the front, 200 at the sides, 170 at the rear. Very well armoured turret. But it's really the hull armour that makes this thing interesting. Now, it doesn't quite have the same pike nose as the IS-3 does, with that pre-angled armour at the front. But it kind of does, because you've got the cheeks here, which are angled, but this sort of triangular upper frontal plate isn't. Now, I've tried to get my head around the actual effective armour thickness of the IS-4, and it's a real mess, because it has so many different armour zones, all with different effective thickness, and it's just really complicated. But a general rule of thumb, when you're looking at the IS-4 from the front, at the moment I believe this is changing. This driver's hatch here, not the sides of the driver's hatch, which are much more heavily armoured than anywhere else on the front of the tank. These little collars of the driver's hatch, do not shoot at those, you won't get through. But this triangular section here with the driver's hatch can be penetrated with a 160mm penetration gun, but it's a small target, and it is quite well sloped. The rest of the upper glacis, I think, because it's sloped at 160 degrees and it is 140mm thick, the rest of the upper glacis can be penetrated, if it doesn't bounce, by a 214mm penetration gun. The lower glacis, where the tracks are, is a weak spot. You don't require as much penetration to get through that, but it's a very small target. These collars from the front are practically no hitbox zones. They're just so tough to penetrate because it's still 140mm, but look at the sloping and angling on it from the front. That's just, forget it. As with the IS-3, if the IS-4 turns like that, then the collars become the place to shoot at, because it flattens the angle and it reduces the effective thickness. And the front here, the upper frontal plate, becomes harder to penetrate. So shooting at the IS-4 largely depends on which way is angled towards you. So, from the sides, 30-45 degree angle when they're trying to improve the effective thickness of their lower plate, then the collars here become the place to shoot at. Directly from the front, if you don't have the accuracy, and I believe that this is at the moment, but in patch 0.8, that driver's hatch at the front is basically not going to be a weak spot anymore. But if you don't have the accuracy to hit that, then this upper frontal plate, where you'd expect the armour to be the toughest, becomes the place to shoot at the IS-4. Certainly if you're aiming at the hull. Now from the sides, it appears 160mm. In fact, let's have a look at it from this side. No, there's just as much crap mounted on the side there as well. 160mm seems like a worse deal than shooting at the front of the thing, 140mm. But again, it's a kind of a small target to hit, and this is spaced armour up here, so penetrating through the side of the IS-4 can be problematic. The single biggest, weakest spot on this tank, however, is underneath this spaced side armour, right here, the lower side hull. If you can get through the tracks, and Russian tanks are legendary for having high penetration shots just disappear when they get fired into the tracks, but if you can get through the tracks, that spot right, this huge expanse of the side of the tank here is where you need to shoot at the thing. That is where you're going to get most of the penetrations on this tank. And from the rear, well, you can pretty much just shoot wherever you like, although this bit here is so incredibly well sloped, it's an auto bounce zone if you're shooting at the back. Aim here, anywhere you like, at the back, this bit here, that bit there, not that bit there. And just about anybody can penetrate the hull at the back of an IS-7. Now, the turret, and again, this presents some issues, because just looking at the raw numbers, 250 at the front, very, very well armoured. I mean, it's the same effective thickness, well, it's the same actual thickness at the front as on an E100. I think a mouse as well. Very, very well, tough armoured front of the turret. 200 at the side, 170 at the rear. But it's not, I'm going to put this, it's not a contiguous protection at the front. This is actually split up into different armour zones, and that 200mm at the side is really only this bit. This bit here, I think, is about 170 thick. So shooting at the side of the turret of an IS-4, and it's kind of sloped, but it's not as well sloped as it could be. Certainly not as well sloped as the IS-3. I mean, look at that. That is a sort of a weak spot on the side of the turret of an IS-4, and obviously the back of the turret, 170. If you've got any kind of like tier 9 or 10 tank gun, getting through the back of the turret of the IS-4 isn't an issue. The gun mantle is very, very good. You're very, very rarely going to be able to get through that. But, and again, we're talking about very, very small weak spots here. It has a bit of a shot trap on the cheeks of the turret here. And what will happen is, if you fire at an IS-4 from the, even from a moderately angled point, like this sort of direction, or even directly from the front, and you hit the bottom of the cheek of the turret, what can happen is the shot bounces down and goes through this bit here, and it will penetrate that every time. Very, very hard target to hit. And it's the same on this side. Shots that hit this part of the turret have a very nasty tendency of ricocheting straight down into the top of the hull here, and they will always go through if you manage to do that. Now, specific weak spots, the driver's periscopes here are weak spots. Anything hits that tends to kill your driver. And these, but I mean, they're incredibly small targets. And the same goes for the little periscopes and patches on the top. They're not easy to hit. They are weak spots, but they're tiny. I mean, good luck hitting those at anything other than point blank range. The top, much as on the IS-3, big old weak spot here. However, look at the angle, and hitting that from the front is very, very difficult. If you're on higher ground than an IS-4 and you're able to look down and shoot down, that's a good place to shoot them, because you're almost always going to go through. But generally speaking, it's a hard target to hit. So, and it's very, very difficult to talk about the armour of the IS-4 because it is split into so many different zones, and it all depends on the angle that you're facing him and which side he's presenting, the slope to you. But it is a tough tank to hit. But like the E100, although not quite to the same degree as the E100, it's all about the angling. You present your front towards the target, and this becomes the place to shoot at. If you turn slightly that way, then this becomes the place to shoot at. If you look at an IS-7 from here, well, you can get through the side of the turret if he's covered up his lower plate. If his lower side hull is available, that's where you shoot him. From the rear, you can shoot just about anywhere except there, and you will go through. I mean, I've got a video of driving an IS Tier 7 heavy tank where I came across an IS-4 and killed him in 4 shots because I managed to put 4 shots right through the back of his tank without him. I mean, he got 1 shot off at me, knocked my gun out, repaired it, drove around him, put another shot into his ass. From the rear, these things are incredibly easy to kill. Now the gun. Well, the stock gun on the IS-4 is it's the gun on the IS, the 122mm D25T. However, you really don't want to be using that gun on a Tier 10 heavy tank. You don't even want to be using that gun on a Tier 8 or 9 heavy tank. However, to get to the... I'm looking at the wrong bloody tank. No. To get to the IS-4, you have to go through the STI. And to get to the IS-4 from the STI, you have to unlock the M62 T2 gun anyway to get to the IS-4. So nobody should be playing the IS-4 stock with that gun. Now, what you did see when patch 7.3 was released and this became a Tier 10 heavy tank was if you had fully unlocked the IS-4 prior to patch 7.3 and researched the 130mm gun on it, then you got a brand new Tier 10 IS-4 with this M62 T2 gun on it. If you'd unlocked the IS-4 and had it in your garage but you hadn't researched the 130mm gun when this was at Tier 9, then you got your IS-4 in your garage but you didn't get that gun, and you then had to grind out the IS-4 using this Tier 7 heavy tank gun with its 175mm of penetration and 0.46 accuracy. That was bad news. And you saw a lot of people driving IS-4s on the day that patch 7.3 came out with that gun, and they were just, you're a complete liability to your team. Now that doesn't happen anymore because now, as I said, to get to the IS-4 in the first place, you have to unlock that gun on the STI anyway, and it is a very good gun. The rate of fire is slow, but the rate of fire of all of the Tier 10 heavy tank guns is slow, except for the gun on the T110E5, which is pretty fast firing, but does lower damage. 5 rounds per minute. Very, very good penetration. 268mm. That's like a BL10, and a respectable amount of damage. 440. It's one of the more accurate of the Russian tank guns. I mean, it's not that accurate, but it's 0.38 accuracy. I mean, let's compare to the other gun on the IS-4, which is 0.46 accuracy. That's typical Russian accuracy standards. This gun is relatively accurate, and the aiming time is kind of slow, 2.9 seconds. It's even worse on the STI and the IS-8, 3.4 seconds, because they're Tier 9. When you get it on this thing at Tier 10, it's better, but it's still not good, 2.9 seconds. But the relatively low accuracy and the relatively low aiming time don't really matter so much on the IS-4 because it's a brawling tank like the IS-3. This tank is all about getting up close and personal in the enemy's faces and just blasting them right in the face with this monstrous gun. And at the sort of ranges where you tend to engage with the IS-4, the aiming time and the accuracy are not really much of a factor. Oh, hold on, I'm being PM'd. Oh, just a second. Oh, he's gone. Anyway, missed your chance to say hello to YouTube there, mate. Anyway, so now equipment. Well, you definitely want a large caliber tank gun rammer. You want one on every heavy tank if you possibly can, because heavy tank guns take a while to load, and getting that loading time down by 10% can be the difference between life and death when you're face hugging an E100. Also, I fitted an enhanced gun lane drive because 2.9 second aiming time is kind of slow, and this is one of the few Russian heavy tank guns that you can actually use as a sniper, because that .38 accuracy isn't bad, and it's got the penetration to maintain a reliable amount of penetration, even at long range. So gun rammer, enhanced gun lane drive to get the loading and the aiming time down, and if you have to, this tank can shoot targets and kill them at long range as well. My third piece of equipment, improved ventilation. Again, I tend to go for this on any tank that has long reload and long aiming time, because as well as improving all sorts of things like the acceleration, the turning speed, anything that's crew skill related, including the loading time, including the aiming time, improved ventilation just helps. Crew skills, I do this on a lot of my heavy tanks. I just go for repairs, and purely because heavy tanks are public enemy number one for artillery, and I don't like having to waste a repair kit to get my tracks back up. And you probably find that usually when artillery misses and blows my tracks off in this thing, or when people aim for the lower side hull here and miss and blow my tracks off instead, this thing doesn't stay tracked for more than 2 or 3 seconds with this kind of repair skill on the crew. And you're rarely in the situation where you need to get your tracks up so you can get into artillery cover and have to waste a repair kit on it. And it just means I get to save my repair kits for repairing the gun or the ammo rack when they get hit. Are there alternatives? Hell yeah. Brothers in Arms is a great idea to get on any tank, but it's a perk. You need to have it at 100% on every one of your crew before it's effective. Aside from that, if you're into clan wars, as somebody commented on one of my other videos, if you're doing clan wars, even on a heavy tank, you're probably going to want 6th Sense. If you're not doing clan wars, bear in mind that the commander on the IS-4 is also the radio operator, so there are 2 different view range skills, situational awareness and eagle eye. Jack of all trades, I don't often get the crew killed on this, and that's what that's what a first aid kit's for. Mentor isn't a terrible idea, just to get the rest of the skills up faster, but you can't really go wrong with repairs on a heavy tank. Certainly not on the commander. For the gunner, snapshot is a useful skill on most tanks, improves accuracy during turret rotation. But because of the way this tank plays, close combat, brawling in your face, it's not as important on this tank as it would be on something, like an E50M, medium tank, for example, or some of the more accurate and less well-armoured Russian heavy tanks, like the Tiger, stuff like that. But again, I've just gone for repairs, purely because I love having repairs on my heavy tank crews. The driver, clutch braking wouldn't be a bad idea on this tank, because 26 degrees traverse speed isn't that good. Off-road driving, it's usually a good, it's a decent choice, but on this thing it can do 43 kilometers per hour anyway. Nah, there are better skills. I wouldn't go for smooth ride because with .38 accuracy and that slow reload, you don't want to be encouraging yourself to fire while you're on the move, unless you're at such close range that having smooth ride and improved accuracy when firing on the move is irrelevant anyway, because you can't miss because the enemy tank is filling your sights. So smooth ride, not such a good idea on this thing. Clutch braking, yeah, definitely a viable alternative, but as I said, I just like having repairs. And loader, well, no, just give them repairs because the loader skills are crap. So that's the IS-4, but we didn't come here to watch me blabbing on in the garage about it. Let's see how the thing plays. So here we are on port, and have a look at the matchmaking spread. It's just tier 10 city. This is a battle tier 13 game. As I'm saying in chat, I'm real glad I'm not a tier 9 in this game. Our team has 2 tier 9s. Everybody else is either maximum tier artillery, a scout, or a tier 10. This is not a fun environment in which to be a tier 9 tank. However, while it's technically true to say that this is the worst matchmaking you're ever going to see in a tier 10 tank, you are still in a tier 10 heavy tank. So there's no such thing as bad matchmaking in one of these things. And what I do here is Wolfpack up. If you can just grasp that concept for a moment of a tier 10 heavy tank Wolfpack. Yeah, I Wolfpack up with 2 IS-7s, and our teamwork isn't especially good. In fact, at one point our teamwork is a bit derpy. But, you know, it does work out quite well because we're tier 10 heavy tanks. You'll see what I mean. So we're rushing over here to the east side to push up directly into their base. And there's one of the IS-7s. There's another one coming up behind me. Now you see that Batchat up there on the bridge. Now this Batchat driver is like I was when I first got used to driving the Batchat at tier 10. I kept trying to do everything in the first 2 minutes of the game, and the first 2 minutes of the game is an especially dangerous time for Batchats because there's all these big old tanks around and you're very, very, very fragile. Here he comes. Look at the map. He's about to drive right in front of 2 tier 10 heavies. And there's one hit. And there's 2. And there's my first kill. So, Batchats, stop trying to do it all in the first 2 minutes of the match. Keep yourselves alive until later on when you suddenly become much more dangerous. Now, the IS-4 and the IS-7 are quite low profile tanks. It's not like the massive, towering, tall German tanks, and if I was trying to get across here in an E-100 or a mouse, I'd be getting peppered by everything, because it's just such a big target. You can sneak past here. It just doesn't take much of a dip in the ground for a Russian heavy tank to be able to exploit terrain features like that and keep themselves safe from enemy fire. Now, these 2 IS-7s seem to be waiting for me to go first. Technically, I do, on paper, have the better frontal armour. So, yeah, fine, whatever, I'll go first. Now, there's an enemy IS-8 who chooses just this moment to make a run for it, and he's probably wishing he hadn't. And you can see, even on the move, at this sort of range, I mean, I might have hit at a funny angle, I might have accidentally, hit the cheek of his turret and bounced, but I did do a good amount of damage to that IS-8, firing on the move. So now there's 3 of us, sorry, two IS-7s and me, but look at that Object 268. Oh no, what are you doing? He just drove right in front of an enemy Object 268. I mean, I could see him on the map. Why wasn't, poor situational awareness. So I have nothing else to shoot at here, and I take that shot through the railway carriage to blow away this guy's cover. Now, I'll pause it here. This is where our teamwork kind of goes a bit there, because this IS-7 back here is shooting at the E-100. This IS-7 is going for the Object 268, and I'm going for the M48A1. Now, we could have done this a lot better, but, heat of the battle and all that, and it's not like we were platooned and on TeamSpeak or anything. But, we could have still made this a lot easier for ourselves by concentrating our fire on one and just angling our armour against the other 2, or keeping cover between us and the other 2. Look at where that E-100 is. It's not difficult to protect ourselves from the E-100 while angling our armour against the M48 and killing the Object 268, which is probably what we should have done, but we didn't. So here's what actually happened. Right, the M48, I'm pausing it here, he puts a shot through. See, at that sort of angle, well, what he actually hit, oh, hold on, that's a very, very dodgy, there's sparks and it's shaking all over the place. Let me show you. What you should have aimed at that angle, although it turns out with the penetration of his gun he didn't really need to, what he should have aimed at was this cheek plate here, because it's pointing right at him, and it just removes the effective sloping. But But with his gun, he actually managed to put a shot through, I think, even though it's angled, managed to put a shot through the upper glacis. But then this Object 268 appears around the corner, and he puts one right through my lower glacis. At that range, with that gun, it's difficult to miss. Boom, there you go. And we'll just have a look at the holes, and there you can see that's where the 268 shot went through. That's where the M48 shot went through. And you can see this IS-7 is still taking pot shots at that E100. And this IS-7 is still going for that Object 268. So we're all fighting our own battles here. And this could have gone so much better if we just concentrated fire on one target. But we didn't. Now this is how you want to be facing off against an M48A1. He still has the penetration to get through. With a decent penetration roll, he can still get through this upper frontal plate, but that is practically impenetrable. This is practically impenetrable. And because my rear of the tank is on higher ground, if you like, and it doesn't take a lot, but because the back of the tank is in the air on this railway track and the front of the tank is lower down, I've increased the angle of the lower glacis. And he just bounced. Now this is quite lucky actually. I'll just pause it there. So I'm backing off and I'm keeping my front pointer right towards that M48, and he can load a lot faster than me. So I'm not quite sure what he's thinking of doing driving over here, but what he's actually done is he's put this solid brick wall between me and him, and he could be taking a second and maybe even a third shot at me while I'm reloading this gun, but instead he allows me to use this wall as cover to reload my gun and then pop out and finish him. Of course the other IS-7's taking an interest in him now as well, and he shoots at him instead of me, and that leaves us, again, this E100 over there, not really interested in getting involved in the fight, and now we're all free to concentrate our fire on the Object 268. We finally start working together. And that just leaves the E100. However, there's an E50 who's just gotten involved in the fight as well. So I've got to make a choice here. Am I going to go for the E100 or the E50? Well, I'd rather have the E100 dead, because he can hurt. At this sort of range, he can hurt us a lot more than the E50 can. Now that means I'm going to have to expose my flank and my rear to that E50. Now he's more interested in killing this IS-7, as he probably should, because he's in lower health. So that's going to keep him occupied for a few seconds, but, well, watch what happens. So I realise the E50's there, but then I also realise, no. How can I pass up the opportunity to shoot an E100 at that sort of angle? Now, this is making me vulnerable to the E50, and those are just the choices you have to make. But we're double teaming this E100 from both sides, and it pays off. We kill him, and then this is where I start paying for it. So the E50 blows my tracks off, and I will use a repair kit for my tracks in that sort of situation, because I ain't sitting with my ass pointing at an E50 while I'm on 32% health. And you can see we can shoot right through that wrecked train car. That one looks like it ricocheted because he was actually angled there, and I think he probably hit his upper glacis and bounced off, but now he's not even bothering to angle. And we can have him. And here we go. Now here, I don't know if he was actually aiming for, what he should have been aiming at was this. At that angle, that's the best chance of penetrating an IS-4. Possibly he was aiming at it, but he missed, and it went straight into the spaced armour or the tracks. And there's 3 kills. And there's the entire enemy team destroyed. That was a good game. You're going to find that the armour of the IS-4 is pretty good. But you're constantly having to make choices about which way you're going to point it towards an enemy gun. And in situations like that, where you've got any number of different guns, all from different points, that could be shooting at you, you can get a bit overwhelmed. Now, we didn't do that badly. I mean, we took 7 hits, only 4 of which actually did damage. And I think we probably did as well as we could be expected to do in that circumstance. I've certainly had games where I managed to bounce many, many more shots in the IS-4 than that. But, you know, I mean, we had an E-50 shooting us in there. I mean, 2 of those shots from the E-50, we knew were going to penetrate. We knew were going to damage us. We accepted that because we needed to be able to kill that E-100. He was far, far more dangerous at that sort of range. Massive old hit from the Object 268. At that range, he's always going to get through your lower glacis. Nothing you can do about that. And 1 penetrating hit was all we took from the M48A1. Now, the M48A1 has a bloody good gun. It has something like 264mm of penetration. But 3 shots fired at us from that M48 and only 1 of them got through. That was a combination. It wasn't so much the armour of the tank itself. The M48 driver made some poor choices and he aimed at the wrong spots and he bounced off the wrong spots. But the wrong spot can suddenly become the right spot in this tank, and it's because of the armour layout. No matter which way you turn it, there's always going to be a best spot to shoot at the front of this tank. And it's a question of trying to point the least weak spot, if you like, towards the enemy guns. And that works usually quite well when there's only 1 enemy gun shooting back at you, or when there are a couple of enemy guns shooting at you but they're all shooting from the same direction. If you start getting flanked in this tank, you're going to get problems. If you have guns firing at you from multiple directions and they're accurate guns, you're going to have problems. That doesn't mean it's a weak tank, but it means that, well, it's not an E-100, whereas the E-100 has its armour all, you know, it's not angled the same way. It doesn't break into multiple armour zones. It's big, flat chunks of armour all at the same slope. So, for example, the front of an E-100, angle it 35 to 40 degrees, and everybody shooting at you is going to bounce off that upper glacis. There are no weaker parts at the side of the front where it suddenly becomes easier to shoot at. You know, it's just impenetrable all from the front. That isn't the case on the IS-4 or the IS-7 because it uses these different sloped and angled armour zones. So playing the IS-4 and the IS-7 becomes a balancing act. You have to figure out, okay, who's shooting at me and which is the best way to present my armour to them. And try not to get yourself into a situation where you've got people shooting at you from 2 or more different sides at once, because that's bad news in any tank. But the gun, comparing this thing to the E-100, for example, while the E-100 is probably better at close range than the IS-4, the E-100 is only good at close range. The IS-4 is a lot more versatile. It's good at close range, it's good at medium range, it's even good at long range. It's not as good at long range as, for example, an E-75, you know, or an E-50M, but it can still get the job done at long range, where the E-100 may as well just be throwing bricks. The gun is so horribly inaccurate and loses so much penetration when it's shooting at long range that in a tier 10 game you may as well forget it. E-100 needs to be up close and personal to work. IS-7 and the IS-4, they don't really mind so much. They're good at close range, they're also good at medium range, and they can still get the job done at long range because they have much better guns. And as you can see in this match, yeah, that wasn't too bad at all. That was doubled, obviously, first win of the day in the IS-4, but that's over 1400 XP, and we still made a decent amount of money. Now, these tier 10 tanks are not money makers by any stretch of the imagination. You can have a really, really good game in one of these things and earn 70,000 credits. Don't count on that happening every time. This wasn't a really, really good game, but it was a pretty good game. 3 good kills, damaged another 3, one of them particularly badly. We really pounded the snot out of that E-100. And that earned us nearly 56,000 credits. But, you know, 20,000 repairs and over 15,000 credits just to reload. We still made a profit, but it wasn't a lot. And you can very, very easily make a loss in one of these things. And don't forget, that's 55,000 with a premium account. So without a premium account, even in a good game, we more or less just broke even. No Battle Hero awards that time. But, you know, still a good result. And of the 12 shots we fired, 11 hit the target. The only one that missed the target was a shot at the railway car that we used to blow away some of that Object 268 to cover. Everything else we fired hit the tanks we were shooting at, and I believe they all penetrated. I've just watched the replay and I can't remember. But yeah, anyway, good tank. I'm not great at driving it, but I'm getting better. You know, learning from my mistakes. Still not fantastic at angling that armour, but I do love driving this tank and getting stuck in at close range and just blasting people in the face with that 122mm gun. It's a fun tank to play, and I don't think you'll regret it if you do get one. I've certainly enjoyed it. I've had it since patch 7.3 when it became a tier 10 tank. And I've certainly not regretted it. As I say, I'm not that great at driving it, but every now and then I just have a good game, and it makes it all worthwhile, like this one. So that was the IS-4 Russian tier 10 heavy tank, having a pretty good game on port, one of the new maps introduced in patch 7.5, and a very good map in my opinion. So I hope you enjoyed the replay, and take care on the battlefield, and I'll catch you next time.